podcast where we aim to ask the question, if pro is the opposite of con, is progress the opposite of congress? Hi James, how you doing?
Not too bad, mate. I'm not too bad, and always a fan of wordplay. So, yeah, that was a good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to the podcast today. So I decided on the subject of political systems. I don't know about you, but I grew up in the UK. I know that you grew up in the UK, but that's not where I was going with this. I grew up in the UK, and I just kind of took the political system for granted. It is what it is. It's always been there. We vote for a prime minister, and there's these parties that exist. I never really, not until I got a bit older, never really asked the question why is the political system the way that it is, and what's its purpose. And so I thought we'd go over a little bit of that today, and try to get to understanding politics a little bit better.
I think that's an important thing. Something, although I was taught that we have a queen and that we have a prime minister and that they vote on issues, I wasn't actually aware of how laws were made in this process, or the fact that you've got the House of Commons, which is then passed to the House of Lords, who then pass it under the Queen's nose for a almost like ritualistic stamp,
Mm.
and then it gets made law. Yeah, kind of glad that I'm glad that I grew up in this country. I think we have been a lot luckier than some political systems. I won't name and shame countries. I'll leave that till we're on a roll. But I was learning about some of the decisions that other countries have made, and it's not that England's got it right by any stretch of the imagination, but I was encouraged to know that we are not the only idiots in the world.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's been a fair few of those, and there still are. So, I suppose the the starting point is always a good thing to go over. Obviously, um, leadership in many forms has been around, like we discussed in our first podcast around royalty, since the early phases of BC, etc. At least in records. But as far as government goes and politics goes, shall we say democracy? Do you know where that started?
Well, I will admit it's something that I've done a bit of research into in the past. So, yes, I believe, or the famous thing that we're all kind of taught, at least, is that it occurred. Uh, it first occurred in ancient Greece, within the city-states system, and I believe it was Athens where a vote was held as to whether they would go to war, and it wasn't everyone. It was only the powder elite of the time, like the male landowners, who got to vote, but each of them got to pick up a stone, and it was a white stone for not going to war and a black stone for going to war, and they each cast their vote, and that's or at least that was the original story that I was taught. But I've
Yeah,
been taught a lot of stories, and
no, you're
the older
absolutely
I
right.
get, the more I realise that some of them are indeed bollocks.
You're absolutely right there. So Athens is considered the birthplace of democracy, and obviously democracy itself, the word can be taken from the Greek language, demos being the people, and kratia being ruled. So the word literally breaks down into democracy or democratia, the people rule. So that's where it was born. It was born after Hippias, the last tyrant of Athens, was overthrown, and was developed in its entirety by Cleisthenes. You were right in that male landowners were the ones that were actually given the decisions for leadership. Archons, there was like a council of archons that would voice these decisions and carry them out and see that they were carried out.
What does Archon mean?
That's an interesting question. It's not one that I've got the answer to off the top.
Because it's a term that's used in Magic the Gathering cards.
Well, let's find
a
out,
lot.
shall we? Archon is an
Have a quick
honoree.
Google.
So it's almost a religious leader, and I suppose that makes sense. Greek. It comes from the Greek word which actually means ruler. So it's somebody who was put at the top to lead, but not in the same way. Because even tyrant itself is a word it's a Greek word for essentially like a single point of power. Tyrants weren't necessarily evil, but they were.
Have they come to mean evil
exactly,
based on
yeah.
the actions of some tyrants?
Yes, absolutely. So that's one of those evolutions of the language over time. So yeah, so it originally started in Greece. You were right. However, India also had a level of democracy. It was a bit different in that, I mean, India was typically led by a large number of kings. However, those kings were advised by an assembly, which was quite close to what we would see today in our Houses of Parliament in the UK or in Congress in America. So these assemblies would help the king make decisions, but overall, the king would have the empirical decision at the end.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's
just another form of historical.
Already learnt a thing or two there. So that's.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we know that politics itself takes many forms. Like you said at the beginning of the podcast, we've got a queen, but we've also got a prime minister and a House of Lords and a House of Commons, and the Houses of Parliament. So there's so much more to our political system than there is in than you can't just put it down to one. This is why I was going to say towards the end that we'll try and identify what form of government you think that we have in this country or in many countries, because I think the lines become quite blurred after a while when there's been all these different kinds of democracy and autocracy throughout time.
Yeah, that's absolute. Yeah. To be fair, I think it's going to be difficult because even reading up what little I have on this, the definitions seem to meld together, and there are several points which, although are stated as though they're definitive within the definitions. Sorry, definitive. Literally means that. Sorry, I've literally used the same word twice there. Oh, it's too bloody hot. Right. The way that they are defined, although it's trying to be as clear as it can, it's fairly obvious from the subjective wording which had to be used in the writing of the definitions that it's not clear. It's clearly not as cut and dry as you'd think it would be.
Yeah, absolutely, and I thought that when I was doing all the research that I was doing towards, getting towards the many different forms of government. Mainly because you have everything breaks down into subsections, and the entirety of the political systems can be refined into two main headings. They are democratic and undemocratic. But underneath those two headings, you've got a plethora of different systems, and essentially you've got as many systems as there are countries and have been countries, because every different country has their own means of governing, and therefore think they do it better, and therefore they carry on doing it that way, and that ends up with its own definition, doesn't it?
Well, that's exactly it. Like every definition normally comes with an example. So just as there is every every different country, if it has enough of a different political system to another country, will be used as an example of a different word.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So,
Right. Well,
let
I tell you what.
go on.
Should we start with do you have a list of different political systems? Like, cause
We
or should
do.
we?
We do.
Okay.
Let's go. Let's say. So before. Let's go back to tribal days, shall we? Now, obviously, tribal days, hunter-gatherers. Um, there's a name for the form of democracy that they have, and it's not dead. As much as you would assume that the form of democracy that these tribal groups used in order to lead and live would have died out over the years, it's so instinctual and implied that it's still used today. And it's called prehistoric democracy, which completely makes sense. It is ancient, beyond ancient. And it essentially is think about when you meet up with a bunch of your mates and you all decide which pub to go to. That's prehistoric democracy. The majority rules, you know?
Yeah.
And that is, it's in its base form, it's so useful because, like I said, you could have a large group of friends and you all essentially take a vote on who's going where and whatever. And yes, okay, not everybody gets their decision, but the majority rule and everybody has a good time because of it. So that was the oldest form of democracy, prehistoric democracy, and like I said, it was still used today. However, you have many different forms of. We're going to go along democracy first, and then we'll go across undemocratic government. Okay, so you've also if you think about the form of government that we've got, okay, there's two different forms of democracy. One that we've got, which is what we call representative democracy, and one which is called direct democracy. And the reason I'm bringing these up together is because they're quite similar in that direct democracy, it works better with smaller populations because essentially direct democracy is the people will vote on every decision. Okay, and as you can think, when the population gets quite large and the decisions get larger and the general running of the day-to-day becomes like mundane, like just decisions having to be like made on a regular basis for the most mediocre things, you end up needing to step away from what was called direct democracy into something called representative democracy. And that's what we've got now, where representative democracy is you vote somebody in to act on your behalf with your best intentions to make those remedial decisions, and then you only really vote on referendums and recalls and other like bigger matters.
Who gets to represent you in the first place?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
we've got a representative democracy, and obviously our democracy itself is split into parties. So we've got a representative partisan democracy, where we've got left wing and right wing and extremists
Although
left and right.
it all seems to be fairly central at the moment. The moment you
The minute you have
offer anything that's different, you kind of get called a radical.
yeah, absolutely,
Um,
and I think
that,
that's definitely happened over time because having those radical views are what developed humanity, and now that we're kind of aging, and shall we say, powers becoming more centralized, then the road that we tend to branch off of is very narrow. Whereas before there were quite opposing and polarizing views on different decisions that were being made.
that's fair. Um, okay, well, all right. So there was prehistoric democracy. when did and then so you'd have that kind of democracy, and then you'd have chieftains. At which point does a chieftain, or sorry, a chiefdom, I should say, become a dukedom? And when does a dukedom become,
A
or a
kingdom.
sorry, I should say, become a kingdom? And when does a kingdom truly become an empire?
Yeah, so I think that more comes down to size, doesn't it?
Well, it does, but I'm not saying that because I've researched the answer here and I'm just using it as a door handle to spout my own stuff. But I was genuinely wondering if you came across that.
No, but
Uh,
I think it would literally come down to populace and size. So, like ultimately, prehistoric democracy, a group making a decision, is different to a chiefdom, because under a chiefdom, you're essentially undemocratic. You're putting your power into one person. You're under an autocracy or a monarchy. If you've got a king, then or a queen, then you've got a monarchy, and if that bloodline then passes its power on via hereditary means, then that's a monarchy. And monarchies can be small and large, doesn't matter, it's just about centralised power through a bloodline. But autocracy itself is power held by one person, doesn't have to necessarily be through a bloodline, it can just be through like the Caesars of Rome, etc. However, I will say the Caesars, Rome was democratic. It was only undemocratic during times of war, where it would vote in a dictator for a period of 6 months.
I did hear about that, and then you also had the attempts where you'd have two people ruling, or wasn't it the triarch,
Yeah,
where they had the idea was that you had three people ruling, but no one of them was powerful enough to kind of take power. And unfortunately,
wasn't that the
although
downfall of Rome?
it was one of them, yeah.
Because
Like
I know that Constantinople split the empire, didn't he? He actually put his, or rather, Constantine split the empire, and he moved his capital to Constantinople, which is now obviously Istanbul, um,
mm,
and therefore moved away from Rome as its capital and left Rome in another.
the fall of the Roman Empire is actually something I've done a fair amount of research into. Um, but just so you know, it that was much later than the Triarchs.
Yeah,
Yeah, like the Triarchs was before then. Although you are absolutely right. From a governmental standpoint, moving the capital from Rome to the fishing village of Byzantine, which
mm,
is why the later part of the Roman Empire, it's called the Byzantine Empire,
yeah.
with it ending in 1453, when the city of uh, the city of Constantinople was defeated by the Ottoman sultans in
Yeah,
the first mass use of gunpowder. Because like up until that point, static walls were the strongest thing you could have, and then it was the Ottoman sultan's use of gunpowder,
unless you're
which
powerful enough to have the Ark of the Covenant, in which case you just blow trumpets and walk around them 3 times and they fall down, right?
I mean, like there's far weirder stuff. In there's far weirder stuff in that book that I believe in than that. Is all I can say. Just yeah, just pray you never end up going against an angel.
Absolutely.
Those things are fucking terrifying. Um, right, sorry. My own my own personal blasphemies aside, I'm very sorry if you're offended. Don't find me. Don't message me. Just yeah, if you want an apology, you can ask for one, and I will consider it. If I have offended anyone with that, I do apologise, but it's not personal. Is all I can say, and it's the stuff that I believe in, so I feel I have the right to talk about it fairly freely. One of the things that really did interest me about ancient forms of government, going back to the point, and sorry for going on a tangent about Byzantine and Constantinople, but it's just one of those few things which I know. Um, like, I was really surprised by what actually happens in oligarchy. Is that the right way of pronouncing
Oligarchy.
it?
It's CH as a K, isn't it? So oligarchy, yeah.
Okay, oligarchy. What really surprised me about it is that you've got a few people leading. So you've got a few lords leading,
Hmm.
and you've got a number of. You've got like it's not democratic.
No.
It is a few people leading, but because I assumed because you've got a few people leading that it was better than a dictatorship. But what I learned from what little research I did before this was that in an oligarchy, um, the rich get richer
Hmm.
because a rich man can buy um, the favor of one of the oligarchs, and it's just everybody tries to reach to the top so that they have then more control over law.
Yep.
Um,
So
which
which country right now is the best example of an oligarchic um,
that is a very good
government?
question. I assumed that form of government had died out. Let's hear this.
It the Russians actually still have oligarchs. They have a number of wealthy powerhouses which are part of Putin's council. Obviously, Putin himself is the main leader. However, without the money and the money and power that is surrounding him through his oligarchs, he would have nothing.
That sounds really, really similar to well, that almost sounds like the reverse of what we've got in our country, where the prime minister is the leader, and then it's the traditional thing which doesn't have the traditional thing of monarchy, which doesn't necessarily have the power anymore,
Mm.
but still there simply because of culture and tradition. And I realize a lot of people hate that, and a lot of people don't see the point in monarchy, and a lot of people wouldn't see the point in oligarchy or continuing. But I do think in change is important, and change should not always be resisted. But at the same time, every tradition exists for a reason, and it's up to the individual to decide if it's right for them or not. You shouldn't just go, oh, well, it's traditional. We'll do away with that. I'll do my own thing. Because you may actually just end up doing the very thing that was traditional in the first place. You just
Yeah,
didn't know it.
yeah, absolutely. And
Actually,
I
that's a
think
really weak argument.
no,
No one quote me on that.
I think I think I get where you're going with it. I think it's important to know what this is why I always question everything. As much as what I might come the conclusion I might come to is that it's not broken and it doesn't need fixing. I still ask the question because I need to know that the way that it is isn't just that way because it it has been and it always will be. It is that way because it works. And I think that's kind of where you were going with it, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Like for example, we didn't know about nutrients or about nearly as much of the um yeah, nearly as much about like chemistry and biology in ancient times. Yet most people ate 3 times a day. You know,
Yep. And then
like
they learned. They asked somebody asked the question, why does this have to be the way? Did the research and then went, no, you know what? This actually works, and there's a reason why it happens. And as much as it might be instinct that drove us this way, the science backs it up, and it's how it should be. You know.
that's it. That's it.
Yeah. So oligarchies are the most common form of government throughout history. Essentially, like you said, aristocracies were and are a form of oligarchy. Um, some even coexisted alongside monarchies. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
So that might be more along the line. No, I think what the Indian people had with their monarchy and their council of um, or their assembly was a little bit different, because I didn't read, nothing that I read kind of said that their assembly of people were powerhouses and wealthy people. I think they were trusted advisors, shall we say, to the king, trusted for their connections to the population, and therefore their view was clear on certain topics. But yeah, oligarchies. So there are a number of undemocratic forms of government, which I'm just going to run them off because there's so many of them that you just basically spill them off. But I'll come to the end and I'll come over the more common forms, and we'll discuss them. So plutocracy is a government which is ruled by the wealthy, and stratocracy is ruled by the military. A theocracy, can you guess what that is?
I can tell you that a theocracy is ruled by religion, but it's different from an elestarchy, which is where isn't an elestarchy where the government and the church are literally the same, whereas a theocracy is more specific about the belief, and although the belief shapes laws, government is still a separate institution from the church. Is that right?
So if you were thinking along the lines of Vatican City, which is its own country, is that a theocracy or an aristocracy?
I think that. Oh my God. Is that a theocracy at that point?
I think it would be a theocracy because it is heavily based on its religious beliefs, isn't it? And
Yeah.
kind of God is the lawgiver, so it doesn't matter about their rules and their laws. They follow the law of the Bible. So, yeah.
I do like that they don't have a. I do like that they don't have an immigration law. Like you can go into Vatican City without doing any passport kind of.
Well,
Kind of messing about.
there'd be a little bit of trouble if they had to have I did have my passport with me when I went to the Vatican City, but you didn't need it when you went in. You just paid your money, and went through the gates like you would do if you were going to like the National History Museum or whatever.
Oh,
But you were
fantastic.
only actually allowed in the public areas. But my God, the level of art in that um, in that country is absolutely incredible.
Well, I definitely want to go there at some point. I did go to the Louvre, and I need to go back there. Is all I can say. There's just so much there.
I mean, I've got
Um,
photos on my phone, and they are some of my most prized photos that I've taken. I'm
okay.
not one to take many photos, but the art in the Vatican City is absolutely astonishing, and the
Well,
age of it and the history of it. I won't go into it anyway. I'm going on a complete tangent here about.
yeah. Okay. I'll take a look at those photos at work next time you're in, if
No
that's all
problem.
right.
No
Great.
problem. So obviously we've got theocracy. We just discussed that. We've got kleptocracy. So obviously klepto. What do you think
Okay.
kleptocracy could be?
Could that just be power belongs to whoever takes it?
Yeah, ruled by corrupt individuals. So, um,
Hmm.
so people
I
that are
love.
out for themselves.
That's the thing I like, though. Or that's something that I struggle with. When I was looking at specifically the examples of tyranny,
Yep.
I struggled very much not. To, I struggled with seeing the difference between because it kept on saying things like people who take control of a country unlawfully. Now, how many people have taken control of a country unlawfully and then just rewritten the laws?
Yeah,
Because I
exactly.
would argue that that's. I'm not going to say every single royal family. I'm not going to say every single dictator.
No, but at
But
some point
if
in
it's
their
not
line,
50%, then I
yeah,
will be very surprised.
yeah. I mean, some point in that system, it was overturned, wasn't it? You know,
Mm.
normally the birth of a new political system, be it a new regime of monarchic leader or a new regime of dictator, like it's still almost taken over in a kleptocracy, isn't it? And then it's moulded into their own form of either undemocratic or democratic political system. So, and I'm going to throw this one out there. Do you know what the name for no government is?
Okay, I'm going to say it, and I'm really worried this is one of those ones where it's just kind of obviously wrong, or it's the obvious answer, so therefore it is wrong. But I'm just going to say it. Isn't it anarchy?
Absolutely, absolutely. I was really
Oh
hoping.
my god. Okay, right. I assumed that was wrong because it was the obvious answer.
No, it's absolutely
And
right because it
being
is the obvious answer.
right, okay.
No, that's right. Anarchy, and there are anarchic parties in many countries around the world. People that don't feel like the government is the way that we should have our lives, and we should each be our own leader. However, it's a very difficult world to envision,
Well,
knowing the variety of humans that are out there, and that could be a very barbaric world.
well, I'd love to say I could believe in anarchy, but um, I can't. I don't trust people. Like,
No.
and that's not the way I should be. And I won't go into my own moral quandaries and shortcomings. Otherwise, that's a whole other topic, which I doubt we will be covering. But like, yeah, I quite like the idea of stepped back society. Like, I disagree with a lot of the people who end up applying for libertarianism in the US. But I would say that the idea of, if you're going to found a country on freedom, it shouldn't surprise you that a lot of your citizens will be attracted to the idea of less government.
Yeah, I think there's a very good reason for that. When you end up with a display of very unfaithful behaviours, time and time again throughout history, your people will slowly but surely begin to lose faith in you and the system. And that doesn't. It's what ends up with revolt over time, isn't it? Like, and that's what ended up with the tyrant Hippias in Greece being overthrown and democracy itself being invented. It's what ended up with. It's what killed a lot of kings throughout history, where their rule offended so many people that they ended up saying, no, we can do this differently, we can do this better, and they took power themselves. And there are some people, dictators, which is another form of undemocratic government, dictatorship, where people take power themselves because they want to impose their change. That there's some very strong examples that we can certainly discuss, which in which dictatorships have gone for the worse.
I think there's several examples as well where revolutions have also, in turn, gone badly. Like, I find it frustrating that if you get people drunk, everyone will like say they want a revolution, but when it comes to the actual day, like, because we all also know that revolution means chaos, it means disruption, it means uncertainty, and it means change. And sometimes that change will be for the better, but if you've got a largely comfortable populace, it's going to be really difficult to actually convince them to change or do anything, because in order to have that political change, you've got to be willing to risk not just a little bit, but risk a lot. And
Yeah,
I don't think people genuinely want to risk a lot. And it's also, it seems like when you're younger, you're very much up for that because at that point you don't have a lot and you're not necessarily in a position where you've got kids, where you've got huge financial commitments or things that you've been, like working towards a house for 30 years. You buy your house and then a revolution happens and some people burn it down. Like, not, I don't know. Revolution isn't a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination, but there is a bloodiness to it, there is a grit to it, and there needs to be a determination behind it, or it's not going to happen, or it will fail.
yeah. And it's very difficult to find that grit and determination when you end up, like the saying, you can't justify the end by the means. As much as you might aim for revolution, you might aim for such a fantastic and beautiful thing. Watching the bloodshed along the way and all the things that you lose, and you might lose yourself in the process. And is that really the price that you were willing to pay in order to get to where you wanted to go? And that's what I think a lot of that's one thing that I think is overlooked when people start pushing, or peoples have pushed for revolution in the past. They've aimed for a better world and have, in the process, created something a lot worse in the process.
Mm. Okay, well, which out of the historical forms um of governance of political systems, which is your favorite and why? Would you say, Nick?
I would probably think, if I was going to go with my favourite form of existing government, I would probably go with a non-partisan democracy where elections and elections were taken place without reference to any kind of political party. The decisions are based on what needs to happen and why, not based on a political agenda. And I think that's like that's a lot of what I kind of live by is make decisions for the right reasons and not for the sake of making decisions. What about yourself?
I'm. I mean, I like the idea of a classical republic. I mean, who doesn't? But like the way that always works out doesn't seem to be great either. Um, no, I will stick with classical republic. Um, yeah, like not everybody gets the vote, but if you're able to work your way into a certain, oh, okay, no, because you see, just right there, I've just said that not everyone in this country should get to vote by extension. Nope, no, I don't know. It
It's a difficult question, isn't it?
it's a
And
difficult question, so, and if you're like me, listeners, you will put your foot in it. Um, no, I'm trying to think of good dictators, and there have been several throughout history. But the problem is like when it comes to dictators, you're rolling the dice depending entirely on the mental fortitude of the individual
absolutely, I
and the
mean,
base of their personality. Like if they were a dick to begin with,
yeah,
they're going to keep being a dick, and even if they were a nice and reasonable person to begin with, they
I
might
mean,
still end up going wrong.
obviously we were discussing um, Rome earlier, and they opted to elect a dictator during times of war in order to centralize power and make them stronger. And for the main part, that dictator was for the love of Rome and made decisions, fair and just decisions, strong decisions, but fair and just decisions, for the betterment of the country or the empire. However, there were times when you look at Emperor Caligula, where dictatorships went completely the other way, and you ended up with a complete madman at the helm, which doesn't work very well for the country or the empire at all. So yeah, I definitely get where you're coming from, where you kind of roll the dice based on the psyche of the person that takes over, but also what happens to that individual whilst they're in power. I mean, Hippias, the last tyrant of Greece, the reason he ended up being labelled as quite a horrible man or a tyrant in turn was because his brother was murdered, and he became very angry because of that. So, you know, power is a very dangerous thing, and this is another thing that I wanted to kind of go over. Like, power is dangerous, and when you end up with centralized power, it's who was it who said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely?
I don't know who originally said it, but it's a very famous saying, and I should look it up.
Well, it's absolutely right. It's absolutely right. Now, you look at things like Marxism or socialism, like the idea in itself is actually quite wonderful. The very base of the ideology is actually quite wonderful. It's about everything being available for everybody. But the problem is that when you end up centralizing that leadership and corruption comes in, it doesn't work. You end up with democracy. But when you end up with decisions being made by wealthy people, no matter the political party that's in power, like them paying to have certain decisions to be passed through Parliament or through Congress, that's corrupt, you know? Even, like I said about Marxism, like communism in itself, like the Chinese had communism, the Russians, or rather the Soviet Union had communism, the Germans had communism, and it
Do the
worked
Vietnamese
for
have communism at the
yeah.
moment?
The Vietnamese are still, I believe, communists,
Mm.
but it's still corrupt because the power centralizes at the top. It's not distributed to the people like it should be. It's centralized at the top, and when you end up with that situation, you end up with an imbalance of wealth and an imbalance of power, and you end up with essentially a dictatorship, and an oppression where the people are drilled down, ground down, and made to feel worthless because they've got nothing. In the small party at the top have got everything. So I think there's a couple of things that I found when I was looking things up that kind of made me go, you know what, so much of government is good and has the potential to be so good. But power, humans and power, humans and power, and you throw money in as a means to gain power, and my God, you've got a recipe for disaster no matter what person. And I mean this. There are very few people in the world that can say that they would not be corrupted by money and would not be corrupted by power. You know.
Yeah, that's it.
And that kind of leads me into my next question for you, which is if you could design your own form of government,
Now
what would it be?
it takes a very sharp mind to do something like that, and I think it is beyond me. Like, did you know? Annoyingly, I've learned a lot of my facts from lowbrow media, but at the Constitutional Convention in I think it was 1880. Was it 1880? 1881, 80. It was in the 188. No, sorry, it was in the 1780s. Alexander Hamilton, who was one of the revolutionaries in America, gave a 6-hour presentation on a new form of government, which ended up being like a number of things would change, but that was the start. That's one of the starting points of the American government.
Yeah, the
Right there.
constitutionalized democracy,
Yeah.
which I think it's got great legs, for lack
Yeah.
of a better term.
Absolutely.
It's got great
Absolutely.
legs. The fact that you give a baseline for any kind of future governor, in order, like almost like a rule book.
Well, I do like that there are certain rights which are protected. Like, and although, you can argue how corrupt things have become over the years in America, and you can argue how much of that has fell away and how much of that still survives, but the very fact that they have a freedom to speech, and there's nowhere in our constitution where we have that freedom. If you take it away from people, it will cause uproar. But the number of times that like a certain rally or a certain demonstration is just kind of stopped by police, or like dissuaded or disbanded, and
Well,
the fact that
the use of media goes hand in hand with the voice of the people, doesn't it? If the voice that the people are projecting, if what they're trying to say isn't in agreement and accordance with what the people in power want to actually portray, then the media don't cover it, and they won't cover it in order to silence that voice and to exhaust the efforts of those people that are trying to project that image, irrespective of whether that view is for the better or not. And then what they will do, I mean, the power of media is more powerful than the freedom of speech, I think, and that is where so many countries go wrong now. I mean, you can take a video of a riot like a pub brawl on a street corner, plaster it up on the news, and say that an entire country's in civil unrest, and the entire world will believe it, because all they've got to go by is what you've told them and those images that you've put on the TV, and if they can do that with one little image, then they can do the complete opposite by not portraying it at all.
Yeah, yeah. Ah, yeah. No, it's interesting that, like, I know, control the media, control the mind. It's an overused saying, but at the same time, it is entirely. There's a reason why things are overused.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's definitely. So I, as much as I don't think I know better, but I know there are times when I've had the audacity, shall we say, to think I know better, and when I've
We've
listened
all
to.
had those moments.
Yeah, exactly. I've listened to a lot of other people kind of say, "Well, if I was in power, I'd do it this way, I'd do it that way." I think I would, if we're going to answer the question, I would utilize more of the technologies that we have available to us in the modern day in order to lead, in order to govern. I don't think you can give power to people without corrupting or risking corruption. So I feel like constitution is definitely where, is definitely the right way to go, but constitutionalize a governing, shall we say, computer. A computer that has no choice but to act on its own constitution. And pose those questions and queries to that governing computer. And that computer will make impartial correct decisions based on the information that it would have present to it, which would be the economical effects, the environmental effects, the social effects of those decisions, and then it would be able to make a statistically correct decision, which you can't get through democracy in its rawest form, because everybody's got their own agenda. And when everybody's got their own agenda, everybody's out for themselves. And they're not out for the betterment of the world, the global populace, the planet even. Like, everybody's out to protect themselves. You look at how many decisions get passed through Congress and through the Parliament now, which have such detrimental effects on the planet. I mean, they've pledged 80 million into research into quantum power. Okay, now this has only been done recently through the British government. 80 million. Okay, do you know how many billions we've spent on bombs and ships and aircraft? And like, when you're looking at quantum power, you're talking about 0-point energy. You're talking about energy out of nothing, essentially out of nothing, out of the fabric of space. Okay, now science proves that that is a possibility. Nikola Tesla has shown that that's possible. Why isn't it a thing? Because the people with money don't want it to be a thing. Because the main people with money are people with oil, people with amenities. I mean, way back when Tesla was developing a lot of these technologies that he had, the person that he got his funding from got most of his money through copper wire. And what Tesla was proposing would eradicate the use of wires. He was talking about power that could just be drawn out of the space around us, and therefore didn't need to be distributed across a power grid or a centralized power grid. It could just be a box you put in your house that drew the power for you and created the power for your house. So the bloke stopped his funding and denied his patents, paid the government to refuse his patents, and then Nikola Tesla ended up alone, very poor, and when he died, all of his I think they said like 20 cardboard boxes of his documents were seized by the government. I mean, Donald Trump's family had a hand in those documents being seized. His family were one of the powerhouses that actually seized those documents. So that's an example of how you give power to the wrong people and you mix money into the middle of it, and humans can't be trusted to make the right decisions. They will make the decisions that better themselves. It's part of human nature, it's survival of the fittest, which is why I think if government is going to evolve forwards, I think we need to step away from humans governing and give power, not necessarily power, but the decision making to something that is impartial and has no choice but to be impartial.
I can completely understand, like, humans are corrupt, but I will say I disagree, but the reason for my disagreeing, I'm aware, is also very flawed and also a little bit evil, if I'm honest with you, but I'll explain myself. Everything you've said there makes sense. The idea of the incorruptibility, if you gave a machine the numbers for human happiness, and even if there was a slight skew in the subjective value of those numbers, as they would chosen subjectively, you would end up with a stronger and more efficient form of government. The thing that terrifies me there is that there's not an out switch. Do you know what I mean? Like with any evil dictator, although a lot of revolutions fail, if you chop the head off the snake, in a way it's done and massive change is brought about. Maybe not all the change, maybe not all of the good things that you wanted, but at the very least, that individual's rule and say on things is done. Whereas with a machine, I'd be really worried about, okay, well, we've turned off this machine or we've turned off this algorithm. We're now going to try this one instead. And if all of the base coding is the same on the next one, like, I don't see it as a discontinuation. And also the fact that machines and IT systems, like, okay, IT systems, me and you both,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you know what, I'll be honest, and I hope that you're okay with this. Both of us work in IT, and so when things are interacting with other systems, they've got a lifespan. But if you put all of your development into keeping a system alive and making other systems work around it, you could keep that going indefinitely. I guess I don't want an infallible, immortal, but inhuman, incarnate dictator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely.
And although you've made a lot of strong arguments there, and I'll agree with a lot of your arguments, quite possibly, and I hate this because I'm undermining myself here, but I feel it's always better to be fair and honest. That fucking terrifies me.
My aim was to be controversial. Don't get me wrong.
Okay,
I
all right. Well,
I asked the question.
well, I always get. Yep, talk about a massive robotic overlord,
No,
and don't worry, I
that's
will shit my pants.
I think that's perspective, isn't it? I think there is so much that is put out in, like, you look at Terminator movies, etc., where Skynet is this is, and even the Matrix, the machine takes over. It's all there just to, like, it almost feels like it's to make you terrified of technology, whereas technology doesn't scare me. I think if technology is given intelligence and self-awareness, then yes, absolutely, it would be terrifying. But we've been using computers for years, and
they haven't killed us yet.
Exactly. And if it's designed in the right way, I mean, the one film that I think does project it properly, is iRobot, where intelligence itself is given a set of unbreakable vows, shall we say, that it must adhere to, and it cannot harm humanity. It must always aim to support humanity, and it puts its own life second to humanity. Ultimately, we design these machines to serve us. Technology should be freeing. It should be freedom, you know. But because of the system that we live in, and much as you said, and I'll come back to this point, but much as you said, like designing a program, and just because it doesn't work, rewriting it, if its base code is the same, then essentially you're on the same path. But there's no
Or if
reason.
replacing one robot dictator with one that was built exactly the same way in the same factory using the same parts with the same operating system, and then has the memories of the old one loaded into it.
Yeah,
that's not a different system
no,
of government.
exactly.
That's still the same.
Yeah, but tell me that the government that we have, human brains, isn't doing exactly the same thing. We're all built in the same society. We're all educated in the same schools. Our leaders are all educated in the same schools. They are all the same boxes that come out of the factory and get put into positions of power. And we go, we don't like this one, so we get rid of that one and we put another one into place that's exactly the same. That's come through the same education system. That's come through the same kind of factory that we all have, or they all have, because I'll say this now: most leaders in our country and in those others of the most powerful in the world tend to go through the same education system, and it is separate to our own. They they're exactly the same thing. You know, they're just wired differently. There's a different chip in this one, and there's a different outer coating on that one. You know, but it's all exactly, if you see things in that perspective, you're doing exactly the same with humans. You know,
Maybe
but
it's my
there's
own
so
lack of
much.
empathy, but I see a huge variety in each person. Even if people have been to the same school or are from the same family or hold the same beliefs, there's enough of it, even assuming that I'm wrong here, and quite often I do assume I'm wrong because of just the amount that it happens. There is enough of a superficial difference for me to believe that it's different.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of the right way of putting this here. Yes, you're right. It might just be the other robot's got a new red coat of paint or something along those lines. But because everybody's because every okay, so this world is massive. We all only have a tiny keyhole into this reality. Because we've got this tiny keyhole, I believe that even being put through the same education system, having similar family experiences, even in the controlled media environments in which we live, I still believe there is enough difference and enough room between those things for it not to be totally a controlled system.
yeah,
And I guess that's my problem. That with all systems of government, you go from freedom and no government to totalitarian control, and I always I always feel there should be a balance, and you should always be asking yourself, when have I gone too far? I think if you put all of your things into a machine that can live forever and live indefinitely, arguably the perfect leader, I find that too close towards the perfect control. Maybe I don't think I'm an anarchist at heart, but I do believe that there needs to be an element of chaos even in government because we are chaotic beings. But that might be that's oversimplified and that's wrong. But I tell you what, tell me why if you can tell me why I'm wrong and what are your views on that?
no, absolutely, and I think that was the whole point that I was trying to make there. Wasn't necessarily this is what I think should happen. It was tell me why this couldn't. You know,
Okay.
and
All right.
it was maybe, and this is what when we spoke about like putting this making this podcast, I did say that there are going to be times when
You play devil's
I
advocate. You did it
challenge the
very well.
challenge the narrative, you know,
Mm.
and like as you said, it's a very compelling argument to have almost an artificial autocracy, almost an incorruptible autocracy, um, and it on paper, and especially to the autistic brain, um, there's very little logical um, um, imperfection with it, shall we say. But
Mm.
you add the human element into it, and it becomes questionable, you know. But as I said, it as much as I don't want to ever come out with a comment which people think, oh no, like I don't agree with what he says and that's offended me. Absolutely do come back and challenge it. Most of what I say, and I say this more for the listeners than for yourself, most of what I say will be in an aim to either challenge your belief and get you to question it for the growth of yourself, or to reaffirm that belief. um, I don't ever aim to offend. What I do aim to do is either strengthen your own belief or help you grow as an individual. Um, and in turn, that's all I aim to listen when I listen to challenges on my own perspective, is to help me develop past any impurities, shall we say, that I have in my perspective, or maybe just strengthen my own belief.
That's fair enough.
So with that, I think we get to the point where we kind of go, okay. So we've gone over the different types of government that we have, okay, in history. We've kind of I highlighted a version of government that could be the future of governing. What kind of government do you think we have? What could you title our government as?
Okay, so I would say we're a representative democracy, but I like the fact that we do have a king or queen, and for example, if a law was a complete load of bollocks, and say even if um if our king turned around and said, no, that's bollocks, you're not doing that, and then, took a march and went on social media about why this is wrong and why it shouldn't happen, yes, he would be deposed, but it would cause a massive problem for that bill to go through, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that would, just the very fact that that's a thing, is, I think that's good. The fact that there are points of stop and points of
Challenge.
Points of challenge. That it's not just somebody writes a law and immediately it goes through.
Yeah.
Like
Everybody's
just
perspective is valued, and therefore.
Yeah, that's it.
So on paper, our government, you could title it as a constitutional representative democracy. Constitutional because we have a monarchy, but they don't really have a large amount of power. It's kind of parliamentary. The main bulk of the power is parliamentary, and therefore our parliament is based in its own delegates and parties, so therefore it's a representative democracy. So you could call it a constitutional parliamentary or representative democracy. Now, I would like to challenge the narrative again and kind of push towards it being more of a plutocracy. And I say this based on my own observations that I've made through my upbringing, and that is that, you know what, I've never been one to vote regularly. It's taken a lot for me to actually go and vote, and that's not because I don't want to, because I absolutely do, but it's because I don't feel that the people that we're voting for are the people with real power. And as I said, challenge the narrative. This is me having a strong opinion, but there's reasons for it. And the reasons are that there's so much money now outside of the government in private organisations. You said it yourself in our education podcast, where you said that was it the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, that funded the education in America and built the education system, or was it in the UK?
It was the Rockefeller.
Yeah. And essentially, if you've got a family which can impact the prescribed teachings, should we say, through the use of money, and that's only one occasion that it's happened through education. It's happened a lot more. You've also got the same with the health system. You've got numerous different acts that are passed because people with power, people with money, have given the government a large amount of money and said, pass this act because pass this act and I will give you a lot of money. And that in turn has led to laws and regulations which now rule the country. When you have a parliament or a government which is bought regularly by private organisations, I don't think you have a democracy anymore. I think you have a plutocracy. And as much as I said, it challenges the narrative, and maybe I will get a bit of backlash from a lot of people by saying it. I think I am right in saying that when we have an existing plutocracy both in this country and in others around the world, that money rules now, and I don't think it is governments that do.
To be fair, there's so many there's so many little so many people have said that the world isn't ruled by countries, nations, royal families, but corporations. I'm not sure if that is the case or not, but I mean, like, money does have a huge amount of power. Like, we've all heard about the recently when this podcast was made, a billionaire went down to go see the Titanic in a not homemade but not 100% well-made sub, and it got crushed horribly. We've all heard about that. That's everywhere on the news. What we didn't hear about, and what has come to light, because it's still news, but it's not got nearly as much coverage, is that 700 people died, immigrants died in a boat on its way to Greece.
Exactly.
One billionaire, 700 people, 700 migrants.
And I'll say this for something: one person out of the 700 that died in that boat accident would have had more people mourning their death personally than, and I'll say this because I have seen, the son of that billionaire, when he went missing underwater, went to a Blink-182 concert. Did you know that? Knew that his stepdad had gone missing under the water in the Titan that was on its way down to the Titanic, and still went to a Blink-182 concert.
You could argue that maybe he was drowning his sorrows.
I think he did put it out there.
That was bad wording, and that was not intentional. But that's not what I was going for, though. That's not my subconscious. That's just dodgy wording. I don't know. When messed up stuff happens, sometimes people do just keep going with it. You know, they keep doing the thing that they are aware of, or they'll keep just following. Just how I'm trying to think of the right wording here. When things go horribly wrong, sometimes you will just stick with what you know.
Yeah, but it's the difference in it's what money breeds, isn't it? So the means for him to come to terms or deal with the missing stepfather at the bottom of the ocean was for him to go and be a consumer. Wasn't for him to go and be with his mother and be with family and seek solace in that. Because the system that he'd grown up in was very material, he went and was a consumer in order to deal with that trauma. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Whereas as I said, I happen to firmly believe that any survivors of the disaster with the 700 immigrants, however they weren't survivors themselves, they would have had family that are survivors of that, and have to deal with that trauma. They would, given the fact that they were immigrants, being from therefore not wealthy background, they would be seeking solace in the loved ones around them and the here and now, and actually bearing their feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. Annoyingly, whilst I've been listening to you there, my mind has come up with a few more has just generated bad puns, which I'm now aware of. So we'll have a quick chat about those. I'm not going to say those on record. It is a shame that we're now going into consumerism, and it's interesting that idealism leads to revolution, or idealism and efforts lead to revolution. I'm not sure where consumerism leads, although lots of people seem to think that it's going to end up being with a mixture of nihilism and narcissism. I am worried about those elements being in politics. Although I'm unable to come up with a good political system, as I don't know what would work for the most people, I will admit at least capitalism keeps us keeps us miserable in comfort, I think.
Yep, so
the famous quote which says money won't buy you happiness, but it at least teaches you to be miserable in comfort.
Absolutely. To give capitalism its definition, capitalism is an economy that is built on buying and selling as a means to maintain growth. And it's not centralized around the personal growth, it's centralized around financial growth, which is completely impersonal in itself. But it is a political system it's a system that is heavily used in our political systems in the Western world. So you've got obviously communism and capitalism as two different branches of the same thing, where communism is the distribution of power and wealth to everybody, which, as I said, in a perfect world is fantastic, but you end up with it corrupt because it has to be led by a person or a group of people, which tend to end up centralizing the wealth and power as well. But capitalism itself is a means for individuals to centralize that outside of the governing body, which is, as I said, which is where the discussion started. Obviously, was where we were talking about plutocracy. And plutocracy is I suppose, a byproduct of capitalism, because you do end up with the Jeffrey Bezos and the Elon Musks of the world, which have extortionate amounts of money. And I'm not saying that they have a political agenda, but they certainly have the money to influence a political agenda if they had one. And that's kind of where money comes into it, isn't it? But here's to hoping that society itself, as a people, have the sense to remember that they are human, and that there needs to be humanity in decisions and not just money. because if we focus entirely on money and economy, then we put aside human and planetary survival.
No, absolutely. Cool. Well, I feel that would be a good place to end, unless you've got specific stuff. As always, these topics are incredibly deep, and we're only going to have. Yeah, I feel that our conversations are good because we're bothering to dig, but we are going at a quarry with a trowel.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my God, we could go on for days, but we're right. We're gonna end there for today. So thank you to everybody listening. I do want to just add at the end here, if you have got to this point and you have enjoyed the podcast, and you want to continue, if you want us to continue making these podcasts, then and you want to support us in whichever way you can now head over to patreon.com/pods with is it N&J Pods or Pods with Nick and James? The link will be in the description of whichever platform you're on, and you can become a Patreon for as little as £1 a month, which will go towards supporting these podcasts and continuing them in the future. So from myself, thank you very much for listening, and from James,
I thank you very much for listening, and apologies for any offence caused. I hope you have a good week, and if you're struggling with money, please don't give it to us.
absolutely.
If you have plenty to spare and want us to keep going, by all means do. But yeah, don't break the bank there. All right. Oh, okay. You know what? I'm going to stop digging my own grave, and I'll see you all next week.
Take care, guys.